now. So, of course, welcome everyone that joined. I'm Nader too. I'm the Transfer Resource Specialist here at UCI for School of Engineering. And I have with me our guest star, Academic Advisor Erica Juarez. She'll be joining us for the Q&A a little bit later during this little workshop hour talk time. So for those of you who are here, this is the Fall Recovery Workshop. So it's, to put it very simply, if fall did not work out as well as you thought, maybe in terms of like grades and how classes went and the stress of that, then I have just a few tips and advice that might be useful and helpful for future quarters. I'll go ahead and start off with the agenda for today. So I'm just going to, so we just did our little neat introduction here. I'll be telling you all about NRs, if you have any of those on your transcript still. I'll be highlighting the importance of self-reflection, see, little highlighter, but this is like a really key point that I'll kind of keep recurring, so important part right there. Another thing I'll do right after that is I'll give my own advice and my own personal experiences with last fall quarter, so not the one in 2020, but in 2019, which is when I came in the first time. And then I'm going to be discussing what some of us call the major question, which is a big question, but it also has to do with your major. So important thing there. And then I will end it off with just a few reminders and a little Q&A. So I will begin. So for the first thing that I want to cover is NR. So if any of you have seen NR on your transcript, that means no report. So when you have a no report, it means that your professor, for whatever the reason, did not submit a grade for you. Whether that be because maybe something's missing, maybe they didn't get it in on time, whatever the reason, it's a very concerning situation. Ideally, you want to get in touch with your professor. If you still have it, if you've seen it and you still have it on your transcript, you want to get in touch with your professor ASAP, because if a NR on your transcript is not resolved after about a quarter or so, so if you got one from last quarter, if you don't get it resolved by the end of this winter quarter, that automatically turns into an F. So if you don't want an F on your transcript and you have an NR, please get in touch with your professor and whoever you can to try and get that resolved as soon as possible. Well, now that we had that very scary moment out of the way, let's talk a little bit about self-reflection. So the first thing that you can do to recover from a bad quarter, because I mean, all of us have it. It's everyone hurts, everyone makes mistakes. Sometimes it's not explicitly your fault. Sometimes there's different things going on with your life, or at least during that quarter. So the ideal thing to do is to really kind of give yourself a little bit of time, like a couple days or something, just to really think about how the quarter went and be very honest with yourself. Like, how did it go? Were you satisfied with what your final grades were? Were you satisfied with, let's say, how grades and assignments worked like in the middle? Did you feel maybe that you didn't study enough, or that you just weren't getting the material? There could be like a million different things that could have gone wrong. And it's going to be different for each and every single person. Everyone's going to, struggle with something different and, breeze through something else. So this is really an important thing that you kind of need to do on your own. You really need to think about it, really do your best to remember as much as you can what has kind of gone on. And if you have not done so this past quarter, but you are really thinking that it might be a good idea, it's not too late. I would keep track of maybe things right now. How are things going? Did you feel like maybe your class schedule is a little intense, maybe with extracurriculars and stuff? It's getting really cramped. Your schedule is getting really cramped. Maybe you need more time to study or prepare for things than you thought. Just try to keep note of it. You might not need like a full-blown journal, but I mean, ideally you want to just keep track of what's going on so that you can, at least next quarter, be able to do this sort of self-reflection process. Now, as someone who, when I started in fall of 2019, so year ago. The thing that I found was that I found a lot of issues that at the time during the quarter, I was like, oh man, what is my luck? I'm really unlucky and like things are just not working out. I don't understand what's going on. Like it was just kind of like a mess, and I was kind of blaming everything else. But after the quarter was over and I was really thinking about it, I'm like, I can't have that happen again. That's just, it's not good for me. I want to succeed. I don't want to have that repeat. And I really sat down and I kind of just wrote down like, hey, what happened? What were like some big issues? And I'll actually go over a few of them in the next slide, but just to give you like a little more of an overview of how I went about it, it was just wrote it down, really, really was honest with myself. I didn't just say, unlucky, or, oh, that professor hated me. I was just like, no, I, didn't spend the right amount of time on something. I didn't put the right amount of effort. I let myself get carried away with other things instead of properly managing my time or my stress or anything like that. So to kind of reiterate, please be as honest as possible with yourself, and definitely give yourself the time to reflect over the quarter. Now, here's I titled this slide My Own Advice because it's kind of advice to you in case you're struggling with any of these things. But these were some of the things that I wrote down personally, like in my own like notebooks and my own paper, and really took the time to think about and properly analyze. For starters, more study time. This is something that I actually made a huge point in the midterm preparation workshop I did last quarter. You need to give yourself time to study. If a professor, like usually your professors will give you a whole schedule of like when your exams and when your quizzes and assignments and so on are going to be, but that's for really good reason. It's not just for scheduling purposes or not having your doctor's appointment overlap. It is for that, but it's also to give you that advance notice so that hey, how much time should I be giving myself to prepare? Usually the thing I hear is that people are like, but I crammed the night before and like I was so sure that I knew everything. Or they'll be like, yeah, I spent like 2 days studying. That should be more than enough, right? Or they'll maybe have just studied like 2 hours with like a study session and be like, that's it. I did it with a study session. I did the thing that everyone says I should do. It's not going to always be that easy or straightforward. Maybe you're the kind of person that, sitting down for like a day or two is more than enough and you're feeling well and prepared. But if, that hasn't really been working out recently, definitely give yourself a lot more time to prepare and study, especially because if you give yourself extra time, like you study earlier ahead of time, you will be given more opportunities to get in touch with your professors. And I'm so sorry about the phone, by the way. I can't really do much about that. But if you have enough time to study, like you study early enough or you start studying earlier enough, you will start to realize your sort of like your problem sectors with the material. You start to see where maybe you're not getting it, when things are not working out so well. And you will also have a lot of opportunities to get in touch with your professor and your TA and actually be able to get answers to your concerns and your questions ahead of time in an orderly fashion for you to think over and to work with, instead of it all being like 10, 11 p.m. the night before, because that will not help you. That will just stress you and you might not do so well on that exam. So definitely give yourself a lot more time. Another huge one is practice, practice, practice. And I will clap every time I say it because it's really important. Like you should be awake for this. Even now, a lot of you are probably going to apply this to like your math classes or classes where you have to do like calculations or diagrams or something. And of course, like, yeah, obviously you should practice those problems as much as you can. But some people will be like, this is a conceptual question. I don't really need to practice it. It's conceptual. There's no math or anything. I should just write whatever comes to mind. If you're that kind of person, don't think of it like that, because you will need to still practice that, even if it's something conceptual, even if there's no math or calculation or whatever. Maybe when that kind of question shows up on the exam, you might not have it right off the top of your head ready, right? You might not be prepared to answer that question. Maybe you didn't really think about it and when it comes up on the exam and you're starting to think about it, you end up wasting precious time thinking about it like during the time of the exam instead of having considered it earlier on when you were doing your studying and your preparation. So definitely practice everything, not just, hand calculation, technical problems. And also practice as much as you can. I know a lot of people will say like, but I practiced all the homework questions and I still didn't do good. Well, that's why I got to keep practicing, not just practice the same questions, but practice other questions, like if it says for your assignment, do questions like 5 to 15. Okay, well, maybe try doing questions 1 to 4 as well on top of that. Of course, you should do your entire homework. You should not skip your homework. But you should do, maybe the questions before, maybe the questions after. Maybe if it's a question that's like really on topic for whatever you're studying and, you don't get it, that might be a sign like, oh, shoot, I need to prep more. And you'll only, as I said, you'll only find this out if you're trying to go above and beyond and re-practice and practice other problems that might not be assigned on homework or mentioned in the lecture. Another neat one, this one I think is oh, let me turn on the pointer. This one's a very strong one, and that is use the right material. So I actually have a bunch of examples that kind of show each possible combination of this. But usually for your classes, your professor or your TA or whoever's like the expert on it, right, will usually be like, oh, you should just study your lectures, and if you study the lectures, you're fine. Or they'll be like, oh, if you read the book, then you're fine. Or if you go to discussions, that's where everything is, right? They'll try to do like a broad sort of statement, like just study this and you'll be okay. Now, I don't want to say here professors or TAs are lying to you, but I will just say take that with a grain of salt. I actually have a very specific personal example of this where for my last winter class, I had a class where the professor explicitly told us in class, hey, you should read the book because it helps. But at the same time, don't rely on the book at all. Rely on what I do. Come to my lectures because I write your exams. So what I say goes. So if it contradicts the book, not my problem, right? And they had that kind of vibe to them. So of course, a lot of us in class, we took their word for it. We were like, hey, they said only review my lectures and my lecture notes and everything, and you'll be fine. Everything else is like a waste of time or it's just like extra optional stuff that you don't really need. Legitimately, right before not the final exam, but like the last midterm before the final, I was like, you know what? I'm just not getting this. It's just not like clicking with me. Maybe if I read the book, take the extra step to like read this chapter, because if I tried like reading earlier chapters, I'm like, oh, well, this is, the professor mentioned this. I don't need to go over this. I was like, no, maybe let me go in depth and like actually look through the book. And let me just say, my grade definitely went up a lot after doing that. So don't just take the word of like, oh, only do lectures or only focus on the homework. No, look through as many things as you can. That just those things might not be enough. There's also the case that you might have the opposite. This is actually a class I had recently, like literally this past quarter, where our professor was like, oh, you should read the book. And like, my lectures are good and they're important, but you should ideally be spending most of your time reading the book and doing the stuff in the book. And lo and behold, the book was fine. It wasn't that it's bad at all. It was actually pretty useful. But the thing that was really critical and really useful were the discussion sections, because RTA was the kind of TA that's like, ah, yes, here's an example of a problem. And like, here's a breakdown of the concept that you need to know for the problem. Try practicing this on your own. And then 2 days later, come like the exam, it's like, oh my God, it's literally the same question, right? So it's definitely keep track of which materials are going to be most useful to you. Because if, someone said, hey, you should study this, and then you don't end up doing good, but it turns out that a different like resource in the class was what helped, then you're kind of in a little bit of trouble. You want to be able to figure out what the right thing is, but you don't want to also study everything if that's going to be inefficient for you, right? Because maybe some topics are going to be redundant. Maybe spending all that time ends up taking away from time from other classes. So just like kind of generalizing it and saying like, oh, you should just study everything ahead of time and that's it. or you should only study like 1 or 2 things. Neither of them work. It's really class and professor dependent. You should give yourself enough time and enough prep, which kind of goes back to the more study time thing and the practice, which is definitely try to experiment and see where it seems that most of the material, most of the important information seems to be focused in, like which resource in specific. This is another one that is really important that I really want to mention, because a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, are struggling with this one. Don't rely on automatic online solvers. And what I mean by that are things like Chegg, Quizlet, Course Hero, so on, right? Now, a lot of us like to use it usually just to see if we're, we like to check our answers, see if we're kind of going about it right, see how other people thought about it. But be honest with yourselves. There are some of you out there that might be just seeing like, this answer on Chegg has like a like on it and no dislikes. I'll just write down whatever they wrote down. That is academic dishonesty. Don't do it at all, ever. Don't just copy paste things. It's dishonest. It's not going to help you. And especially if it's wrong, oh, that's double worse. That's double, triple bad even. So don't just copy whatever you see, or someone told you this is how you should do it, and so you're just going to do it that way, right? Like, don't just treat it as black and white as that. Give yourself, again, practice, right? And try to really think about and tackle the problem, whatever it is, whatever the question, whatever the concept, right? Give yourself a lot of time to play with it. Only by playing with it will you really get sort of a solid understanding of it. I know specifically for me, as someone who's like in comp sci engineering, there are a lot of algorithms and a lot of sort of formulas that we use where, if you kind of just take it like at face value, like, oh, we use this to compute, like, for example, we use this to compute the omega of something, right? And then, you just use it for omega, and then you get a question that's like, oh, well, how do you use it for finding the theta of something, right? Just as, arbitrary number. You're going to be like, oh, shoot, I don't remember this. I didn't study this. Oh, no, I did the homework. Chegg said I did it right. Why am I doing it wrong now? Why don't I get it? It's like, well, you didn't play with the idea. If you maybe played with the idea more, you might notice that, hey, this formula or this concept or this algorithm that I used for omega, if I played with it a little bit, I could use it and like twist it to maybe find theta. And that's what your professor was kind of trying to push you towards, and be like, hey, play with it, think about it, use it. So definitely don't rely too much on these kinds of things. That's not to say like, hey, these are like, they are the devil, do not ever approach them. My personal opinion, if you're asking me about this, is use them as a way to kind of check your answer. So after you've exhaustively attempted to do it and you've done it so many times, and this is just the answer you're arriving at, the concepts just seem to only work when this happens, then maybe see like, okay, well, what did Chegg do it? How did Quizlet do it, right? And if they did it something different, don't be like, okay, I'm just going to throw everything away and I'm going to do exactly how they did it. No, just be like, okay, well, why did they get a different answer? And see maybe like how they applied the concept, how they did it, and try to compare that with your playing and your, playing around with things. And, maybe you'll find a discrepancy. Maybe you'll be like, oh, shoot, I did do it right. They did it wrong. Or maybe you'll find out like, oh, I never really thought about that. That's a smart way to go about it. And if you give yourself, of course, the time, as I've mentioned, give yourself more time, maybe you can bring this to your professor's attention or your TA, be like, hey, I saw someone else online, they did it like this, and I thought this is how I should do it. Like, what's up? Like, who's right, who's wrong? Like, are we both right? Are we both wrong? What's going on? And, by combining these things and using it as a checker and not as copy paste, right, you'll end up getting a much deeper understanding of whatever it is you're trying to, figure out or tackle. And of course, another big reminder, if you're just copying and pasting things you see online, that is academic dishonesty. Don't do it. That is plagiarism and it's cheating. Don't do it. I feel like I shouldn't have to mention that, but I will mention it. Anyway, next point, discussions save lives. A lot of you might have discussions in labs and stuff that are like, they're mandatory, right? Like you have to do them. Otherwise you lose credit or attendance or whatever. But for the most part, usually discussions and labs and that kind of stuff is usually optional. Like, hey, if you need help, come over here. If you don't worry about it. Go to it. As I've stated in my previous example when I was talking about the right materials, your discussion section could be a complete and utter lifesaver. The TA could be really good and they could know their stuff, and that could be what saves you come the quiz or the exam or the assignment or whatever. I know specifically, again, with this class that I had just last quarter, the discussion was completely optional. It was kind of at a weird time too, but we'd go to it anyway, and they didn't post anything because it's like discussion. What is there to post? I'm just answering people's questions. But we'd go to it and be like, oh shoot, this is like heavily focused. Like they'd usually focus on a handful of problems. It's like, wow, very, very similar, if not identical problems ended up appearing on like our quizzes and our exams. So that could be a really big reason to go to your discussion section, right? Your TA or your professor might have structured the class to where some of the stuff they go over in there ends up being the stuff that comes up later. The other thing is that even if you do kind of know the material, right? If you go and you see maybe like, because most of the time people that go there tend to be people that are struggling with the material and they want to figure it out better, right? Maybe someone's asking a question that you're like, I know that's easy. Like that silly person, hopefully the TA can answer their question, right? And then the TA answers their question with like a perspective or an approach that you didn't think of, and you're just like, oh wait, I should have thought of it that way, right? I've especially had a class more recently, this quarter actually, with some of our homeworks, where I approached the problem one way and it was kind of like really long and kind of tedious a bit. And then when I saw how the TA went over it, they legitimately did it in like 2 lines, and I'm like, I could have done it that way. Had I not gone to discussion, like me being like, oh, well, I got the question right, like I know what I'm doing, right? I wouldn't have realized that there was a way easier way to do things. So your discussion could be, or lab or whatever that is, like optional, right? You didn't really want to go to it. That could be a huge, huge lifesaver. So definitely keep that in mind as you're trying to traverse your class and get through it. Now, this is the really heavy question, I would say. This is a discussion that I've actually had over the summer with somebody, where they're basically like, yo dog, I'm doing CSE just like you. I'm doing all these classes and I'm just not doing well, especially on the engineering side, not doing so good. I'm gonna try to find a way to change my major. I'm gonna look into that process. I'm gonna try to, it's just not, I'm obviously not engineering material. And that was like their whole outlook on it. And they've only really been through like a handful of engineering classes. They haven't been like through the whole thing yet. They're also kind of new, but they're just like, man, just not vibing with me. I can't do this. I'm obviously not fit to be an engineer. I should change my major. The thing is, after, summer passed and fall came around and such, and we started to talk about it, we started to, converse more and interact more, and be like, you know what, you seem to be really struggling with this stuff. Like, I can help you. I don't mind. Like, we'll sit down, we'll work through it together. And I ended up finding out that the reason that person wasn't doing so well was not because, this is just not their field of interest. It's not because they just aren't vibing with it. I distinctly even remember getting really mad at them because they asked me, hey, how are you preparing for the exams? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm doing this, this, and that. I'm reviewing these things. And he's like, oh man, I just skimmed the book. And I'm like, what do you mean you skimmed the book? That's like, what? Like, and after, more talking and more experimentation and seeing how like some of their assignments went, I was like, dude, the problem isn't that, it's not that you're not understanding this or you're not vibing with this. It's just, you're not putting in the right effort. And that might be the experience that might be going on with you, right? Maybe it's just that, you didn't work as well as you thought you would. You weren't really satisfied with your own performance. And that's less of because you're not into the field. It's not because you don't have the passion about this field. It's just because, you just didn't really do so good this quarter. Sometimes it just might be that you don't really get along with your professor, right? Like the professor is just not the kind of person that's a great teacher, right? Maybe their approach to teaching might help other people, but just like does not work with you. Like you're a visual learner, they're not a visual or diagram type oriented person, right? Just because you have these like 1 or 2 classes where you just don't really do so well, and you're like, I should be doing well in these, but you don't really do it. It's not always because you're not right for the major. Most of the time you're most likely, yeah, you're in the right major. This is your passion. You're in the right place. It's just these 1 or 2 classes didn't work so great. It happens to everyone, right? It's just people don't really talk about it as much. It's just kind of like a personal issue. So just because you don't really hear about it as often doesn't mean it's not what happens. I mean, even I myself as a CSE major, there are engineering classes, like as an engineer, I should be doing great in them, right? I'm starting to be an engineer, I should be great in them, but there are some classes where I didn't do so good. And there are a lot of classes in exchange for those that I did do really good in. So it's like, it's not a guarantee. I know specifically for me, I always kind of seem to not really do good in all of my CS classes. I even remember like my first CS class here, I got like a whole letter grade lower than what I was hoping for, what I really wanted to, and what I thought I was going to get. And I was like, man, like, am I just that bad at code? Like, do I just not understand computer? And I didn't really take a programming class right after that, immediately after that, but the quarter after, so that was fall. So instead of winter, it was in spring. I ended up taking another programming course, and I was like, oh man, I'm kind of nervous. I didn't do good in my last one. And I did it, and I basically got an A+. And I'm like, oh, that was a fluke. That was just a one-time thing. That was one class. I'm not, completely terrible, awful at programming. I'm no computer programming god. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that, but just because you've struggled with like, a handful of classes, or maybe like a quarter just did not work with you, does not mean that, you're not fit or not worthy for your major, right? It just means that quarter just didn't work out. Now, of course, I don't want to alienate anyone that, has been kind of considering that for a while. Maybe you are, maybe you're not really feeling as enthusiastic or as motivated about this. Maybe, as you're sort of trying to do more, getting more and more involved with your major, but also kind of trying out other things, you're thinking, no, I really enjoy that stuff way more. Like I'm having way more fun doing that and not this. I feel more passionate and I want to do more with that. And this, the stuff I'm studying right now, I don't really feel that into it. That's possible, that might happen. And not doing well in those classes might be an extra sign that maybe your heart's not in it. Maybe you should do a different major or something else. The thing is, as I've kind of stated earlier, it's not exactly an easy choice. You really have to, again, self-reflect and see how you're doing, what kind of subjects, you're doing good in, what bad in, what you feel passionate about, maybe not passionate about. Give yourself a lot of time and a lot of consideration for sure before you make that kind of decision. And another really big reason I say that isn't just because it's a tough decision, but because depending on your school, it kind of might be impossible. Each school kind of has its own different rules around change of major. So, if let's say you are genuinely considering trying to change your major, your school might not be okay with that. They might be like, no, stay in your major, because of guidelines and rules. And mainly because a lot of schools, they kind of expect that when you come in, when you apply to their school in specific, they kind of expect that, like, for example, if you applied under the School of Engineering to be an engineer, we kind of expect you to be an engineer and to, have the passion towards that, right? Of course, this is just an arbitrary example. I'm not saying that this is like exactly how it will happen. But it's a very difficult process. Not just as easy as like, I changed my major, right? Definitely takes a lot of time and a lot of consideration. So for that, my main piece of advice would be, don't just give up or despair. If things get a little tough, that's entirely normal. Things will get hard, things will get easy. Just give it time, give it effort, give it your not 100%, give it your 107%, and hopefully you'll get a better idea of how things are and whether you're really into this or not. So yeah, definitely give yourself more time. So that's really it in terms of the main like anecdotes and advice that I wanted to share. If you of course have any questions, I'm going to open up Q&A like right now. I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So what I'll be doing before that though is I want to give you all a few really quick reminders. For starters, if you have not made an advising appointment with your advisor, your academic advisor, do one as soon as possible. You really should. It's only going to hurt you if you don't. Let me just say that. Ideally, you want to meet with them as much as possible, as soon as possible, especially if you have not done so. Like you have not met with them at all somehow, and you gotta. You really want to get things like your plan and kind of really express how you feel like you've been traversing through your last quarter, especially. You really want to get a strong idea of that. The next thing I want to remind you about is IGETI certification. If you have not submitted it already, it's usually due by the end of winter. So if you came in, just this fall, you want to get it out, not get it out, but submit it before the end of winter, not like at the end of winter, but like ideally as early as possible. Like you can do it anytime between then. So please, if you have not done so already, get it submitted. Of course, it's not, they will still honor it if it comes in a little bit late, so you're not completely doomed, but you don't want to. You don't want to, take that risk. You don't want to play that way. You want to get it in as soon as possible, especially if it's a case of like your university, like your community college or wherever you're transferring from, maybe hasn't, sent out a certification yet, or you're not really sure how to get your certification from them. That would actually be, by the way, a very good reason and a very good time to go and make an advising appointment and get this, worked out and excuse me, and talked about with your advisor. But also, if it's a little late because of things out of your control, then don't worry too much about it. It will still be honored. But just again, try to get in as soon as possible. Don't take this as take your time. Get it in as soon as you can. The next thing I want to remind you all about is the UCI Transfer Hub. So UCI has its own hub for transfer students, in case you guys didn't know about that. So definitely check it out. I actually have their website linked right here, and I will put it in the chat. So if you click on it, you can check it out. Like, okay, this is the main web page. You can check out what events are going to be going on. You can check out different resources. Of course, even on the overview page, it's sorry, the home page. Click. There we go. It's not just this little thing. There's, of course, other options down here for different programs, different initiatives, and other resources that you can, check out and take a look at. I don't want to spend too much time going over each individual one. I'll leave that as sort of homework to y'all. So definitely give it a check out. I've left it, of course, in the chat window, and if as soon as we can get this up on the UCI transfers page for undergrad, we'll also include some links in there for you to check out. The last reminder I wanted to bring your attention to was that transfer hour, the thing we are in right now. This will be a recurring thing every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. There might not always be a workshop going on, but I will, this is an hour that I'm going to have open, sort of like an office hour. If you have any questions or concerns, or you just want to kind of hang out for a little bit and chat things out, maybe vent, right? Then definitely hop into the Zoom call. Usually, ideally, if there's a workshop, wait until we get to like the Q&A for that kind of stuff. But yeah, usually that our current plan is that every Friday, 1 to 2 p.m. Same Zoom link actually, so no worries there. If you have this Zoom link you're on right now, just bookmark it, put it somewhere. I won't change it, I promise. And ideally, the plan is if there are any new workshops or anything, they will be taking place during this transfer hour. So definitely keep that in mind and check it out. All right, so that is it for the main content. I would like to remind everyone also to check out this survey. I will also post this into chat. Oh. So please fill it out. It's just, let us know how we did. There's also some questions about like whether you guys would prefer to have workshops on Transfer Hour or not. Ideally, our plan is to keep it that way, but I mean, if y'all think that doesn't work out very well, let us know. We'll get to work on that. And of course, if you guys have any other questions or concerns at any time, not just like right now, but like literally anytime you have a question or a concern, then you could just always email me at transferengineer@gmail.com. It is right here. I will also copy and paste that into chat. There we go. So yeah, send me an email. I'm usually very fast about it. Even if it's at like 10 p.m., I will get there. I'll answer it.